Welcome back to Thinking in the Margins. I'm your host, and today uh, we are clearing the decks for something massive.
It's a big one.
It is. We are tackling a subject that is notoriously slippery, often frustrating, but absolutely essential if you want to understand the cultural water we've all been swimming in for the last 50 years or so.
For sure.
We are diving into literary postmodernism.
And slippery is definitely the right word. I mean, in academic circles, trying to define postmodernism is a bit of a running joke. It's like trying to nail jelly to a wall.
Right.
As soon as you think you have it pinned down, as soon as you say, oh, it's about irony or it's about fragmentation, it just shifts shape.
But it's not just an aesthetic game, is it?
Yeah.
We aren't just talking about difficult books or writers showing off.
No, not at all. That's a common misconception. We are really talking about a fundamental shift in how we understand truth, reality, and the very stories we tell ourselves about our place in the universe.
A philosophical engine disguised as a literary style. That's how I think of it. And to really get a handle on this, we need to situate ourselves in time. We can't just jump into the wild experimentalism without knowing where we are on the map.
Absolutely. Geographically, it's largely a Western phenomenon, at least initially, though it spreads globally. And temporally, we are looking at the world post-1945.
After World War II.
Exactly. The seeds are planted right after the war, but the tree really starts to bear its strange, glowing, maybe radioactive fruit in the 1960s and 70s.
And you can't understand the post part of the word without understanding the modernism that came right before it.
You really can't. And that's the core conflict here.
We had a whole deep dive on modernism previously,
Yeah.
but let's just recap that core tension. Because postmodernism doesn't just appear in a vacuum, it's a reaction,
Yeah.
a very strong reaction.
It is. And both of these movements, modernism and postmodernism, are reactions to an even older, even bigger idea, the Enlightenment.
That's the bedrock.
Yes, that is the bedrock. For centuries, Western civilization basically operated on the Enlightenment software. The core narrative was incredibly attractive, very optimistic.
The story was that reason, science, and logic are the tools that will lead to human perfection.
Precisely. A linear story of progress. We move from superstition to rationality, from darkness into light. The belief was that if we just cataloged enough plants, built better machines, structured our societies logically, we would eventually eliminate suffering.
A grand project. The grandest, maybe.
It was the ultimate meta-narrative of progress,
Yeah.
and then the 20th century happened.
And it didn't just challenge that narrative, it blew it to pieces.
Utterly. The 20th century was the catastrophe that shattered that faith. First, you have World War I. This wasn't some heroic cavalry charge. This was mechanized slaughter, trench warfare, chemical weapons. It was a meat grinder that made no sense.
But the real death knell for that Enlightenment faith came later.
It did. With World War II, you have the Holocaust and you have the atomic bomb. And that's the point of no return.
And the really disturbing realization, we touched on this in our last deep dive, is that these weren't failures of science. They were the successes of science.
That is the horror of it, precisely. The Holocaust was not some outburst of primitive savagery. It was highly rationalized, bureaucratic, industrial. It was efficient. The atomic bomb was the absolute pinnacle of physics at the time.
So the equation broke.
It did. The simple equation of reason equals morality, or science equals a better world. It just didn't compute anymore. In fact, what people realized was that rationality without ethics can lead to the most efficient destruction imaginable.
So the vase of Western civilization is shattered. It's lying on the floor in 1,000 pieces. And this is the crucial fork in the road. Both modernists and postmodernists are staring at this pile of broken glass.
But they react with totally different attitudes. And it really comes down to the emotional response to that fragmentation.
And you've said before, it's not a sudden, sharp break.
No, it's not. That's a huge misconception. Modernism, think James Joyce, T.S. Eliot, Virginia Woolf, they had already done the heavy lifting of breaking the narrative. They gave us fragmented stories, multiple viewpoints, stream of consciousness. The formal experimentation was already there. But, and this is the crucial distinction, modernism was mourning the loss of wholeness.
We've used this analogy before, the broken vase. The modernist is the person on their hands and knees, weeping over the shards, trying to glue them back together.
That is a perfect image. Think of T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. The entire poem is made of fragments, shattered bits of myth, religion, history, overheard conversations in a pub. It's a collage of a broken world.
But what does the speaker say at the end? These fragments I have shored against my ruins.
Shored, it's a structural term. To prop up, to support. Eliot, and I think Joyce too, believe that even if the world was broken, art with a capital A High art could provide a new kind of unity.
A revised certainty.
A revised certainty, yes. They believed that if you had enough artistic discipline, if you were a genius, you could build a shelter out of the debris. It was what we call an epistemological struggle. They wanted to know the world again.
They still believed there was a deep hidden meaning to be found, even if it was buried under all that trauma.
Yes. And I have to admit, I have a deep affection for that project. There's something incredibly noble in what Virginia Woolf was trying to do, trying to find that luminous halo of consciousness that connects us. It was a genuine search.
And then the postmodernist walks into the room. They see the shards on the floor. They see the modernist with the glue gun. And what do?
They start juggling. Or they make a mosaic that looks nothing like a vase. Or maybe they grind the glass into dust just to see what the dust looks like.
They don't mourn the loss of the whole.
They don't. They suspect that the wholeness was a lie to begin with, an illusion. They look at the fragmentation and say, this isn't a tragedy, this is just the state of things. They celebrate the chaos. They treat fragmentation not as a problem to be solved, but as a playground.
It feels like a shift from tragedy to farce, or at least to a kind of dark playfulness.
It is playful, but it can be a very dark playfulness, and it can feel, well, cold in comparison to the modernists. Postmodernism looks at that profound modernist struggle for deep connection and says, oh, you still believe in deep meaning, you still think there's a center to hold on to. How quaint.
But the postmodernists would argue that the modernist attempt to fix the vase is actually dangerous, wouldn't they? That trying to impose a new unified order is just setting us up for another authoritarian nightmare.
That is exactly their argument. They view the modernist search for a revised certainty as inherently elitist, maybe even authoritarian. If you claim to have found the new truth or the new order, well, who are you to say that? You're just creating a new power structure that excludes people. Postmodernism is radically suspicious of any claim to authority, any claim to universality.
Which brings us directly to the philosophical engine that drives this whole thing. We can't really talk about the literature without talking about the theory. And the name that always comes up here is Jean-François Lyotard.
Yes, Lyotard. In 1979, he wrote a hugely influential book called The Postmodern Condition, and in it, he gave us the definition that has stuck more than any other.
Which is?
He defined postmodernism as incredulity toward meta-narratives.
Okay, let's unpack that term meta-narrative. It sounds like dense academic jargon, but it's actually a pretty graspable concept.
It is. A meta-narrative is simply a grand story, a big story. It's a totalizing narrative that a culture tells itself to explain everything. It explains where we came from, where we're going, and what we should do.
So Christianity is a perfect example of a meta-narrative.
A perfect example. You have creation, the fall, redemption, the last judgment. It covers all of history and all of human experience in one single arc.
What are some others?
Marxism is a meta-narrative. History is a struggle between classes that will inevitably lead to a revolution and a classless utopia. The Enlightenment itself was a meta-narrative. Rationality leads to progress and freedom. Even science, when it claims to be the only valid way to understand the human experience, starts acting like a meta-narrative.
And the postmodern condition is basically looking at all of these giant, all-encompassing stories and just saying, I don't believe you anymore.
It's a profound skepticism. The postmodernist asks the uncomfortable questions. Who is telling this grand story? And more importantly, who benefits from me believing it?
Because if you have one single story that claims to explain everything for everyone,
you usually have to silence the people who don't fit into that story. You have to ignore the experiences in the margins.
Hence the title of our show.
Precisely. Postmodernism is obsessed with the margins because it believes the center is a fabrication. It's a construct of power.
So if there's no grand narrative, then there's no objective capital T truth.
Exactly. All you're left with are lowercase t truths. Plural, local, provisional, my truth, your truth, their truth. They might all be valid in their own context, but none of them can claim to be the truth.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting and for some people really scary. If we lose objective truth, if we decide that reality is socially constructed, what on earth happens to history? I mean, things happened, right? The past isn't just a vibe.
That is the central friction point. In the postmodern view, history is not a transparent window into what actually happened. History is a text.
A text, meaning it was written.
It was written by someone, usually by the victors. It's a narrative constructed from a selection of facts, which are then organized to tell a specific story that serves a specific purpose. And because it's a text, it can be deconstructed. It can be rewritten.
And this leads to a very specific, very cool literary genre, historiographic metafiction.
It's a mouthful of a term, but the books themselves are just fascinating. These are novels that take actual historical figures, real people like Richard Nixon or Sigmund Freud or Harry Houdini, and drop them into completely fictional scenarios.
They don't just use them as cameos, they deliberately distort the historical record.
Aggressively. E.L. Doctorow's Ragtime is the classic example here.
Yep.
You have Freud and Jung riding through the tunnel of love at Coney Island together. You have real historical anarchists like Emma Goldman interacting with completely fictional families.
It blurs the line so much that you, the reader, you stop knowing what's fact and what's fiction.
Or you could look at Robert Coover's The Public Burning. It's a retelling of the execution of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, the atomic spies in the 1950s, a deeply serious historical event. But Coover presents it as this surreal, grotesque circus event in Times Square, and the narrator is Richard Nixon.
But not the real Richard Nixon.
No, a bizarre, heightened, completely fictionalized Nixon. And the point isn't just to lie about history for fun. The point is to make a powerful statement about history books.
These authors are basically saying, the history book you read in high school, the one that seemed so objective, that was a story too. That was a narrative constructed by a committee.
And this crazy circus story I'm telling you, it's just another construction. It's just as valid. It levels the playing field between fact and fiction. It reminds us that we only ever know the past through the texts that survive.
It all connects back to that core idea that language doesn't just describe the world. It constructs the world. We're trapped inside of it.
The prison house of language, as Frederick Jameson called it. We never touch reality directly. Everything is mediated through signs, symbols, and stories.
This fundamental shift from trying to know reality to questioning the nature of reality itself brings up a really helpful distinction made by the theorist Brian McHale.
Oh yes, his book Postmodernist Fiction.
He suggests a way to tell if a book is primarily modernist or primarily postmodernist. He calls it the shift from the epistemological to the ontological.
And this is one of the most useful tools for understanding the difference, I think. Epistemology is the branch of philosophy dealing with knowledge. How do we know what we know?
So modernism is epistemological.
Yes. McHale says the dominant questions in a modernist novel are epistemological. The characters in a Faulkner novel or a Joseph Conrad novel are asking, how do I know the truth? Is this narrator reliable? Can I trust my own eyes? What is the secret buried deep in this story?
It's essentially a detective story.
It's a detective story structure, exactly. The truth is there, but it's hidden, and we have to dig for it.
Whereas postmodernism is ontological.
Ontology is the study of being, of existence, of worlds. Postmodern characters aren't asking, what is the truth? As much as they're asking, which world is this? Am I in a book? Am I in a simulation? Did I just slip into an alternate dimension? Which of myself is supposed to do what?
So it shifts from a detective story to science fiction.
The detective versus the sci-fi traveler. That's a great way to visualize it. It explains why so much postmodern literature feels like it's breaking the laws of physics or reality itself.
And the seminal text for this has to be Thomas Pynchon's The Crying of Lot 49.
It's the perfect example. The protagonist, Adipa Maz, is executing the estate of a former lover. She starts to uncover what she thinks is this vast global conspiracy involving a secret underground mail delivery service called the Trastero.
And she sees its symbol, the muted post horn, everywhere she looks.
Everywhere. And for most of the book, she acts like a classic modernist detective. She gathers clues, she interviews people, she is trying desperately to know the truth.
But Pynchon pulls the rug out from under her.
And on the reader.
Completely. By the end of the book, she realizes she's trapped in a logical bind. There are basically four possibilities. One, the Trastero is real and she has discovered a secret history of the world. Two, she's hallucinating the whole thing. She's gone insane.
Okay.
Three, it's an incredibly elaborate and cruel prank being played specifically on her by her dead lover. Or four, and this is the most ontological option, she has fantasized it into existence, meaning reality itself has warped around her belief.
And the book just ends, right? It doesn't tell us which one it is. It refuses to answer. The tragedy and the dark comedy of Adipa Maz is that she is trapped in an ontological crisis. She doesn't know which reality she's inhabiting, and Pynchon leaves the reader in that exact same trap. It's meant to be deeply unsettling.
It forces you to look at your own world and ask, wait, how solid is any of this?
Yes. Is there a pattern here, or am I just imposing one?
So we have the philosophy down. No objective truth, skepticism of big stories, unstable realities. Now let's open up the toolkit. Because these writers didn't just write philosophy papers. They wrote novels, plays, poems. What are the gadgets in the postmodern utility belt?
I think the first and most prominent tool is metafiction.
Writing about writing.
Exactly. Foregrounding the apparatus, constantly reminding the reader that they are holding a physical object made of paper and ink.
So traditional realism, think Dickens or Tolstoy, wants you to forget your reading.
Yes, they want the book to be a transparent window. You look through the glass and you see real life. Metafiction takes a hammer and smashes that window. It says, look at the shards, look at the frame, look at me, the author, standing here typing this very sentence.
The classic, maybe the purest example of this has to be Italo Calvino's If on a Winter's Night, a Traveler.
Oh, absolutely. It's a masterpiece of the form. It begins with the ultimate meta move. The first sentence is literally, you are about to begin reading Italo Calvino's new novel, If on a Winter's Night, a Traveler.
It addresses you. The protagonist isn't some fictional guy named Mario. The protagonist is the reader, you.
And the plot of the book is that you, the reader, have bought a defective copy of the book. The pages are all mixed up, so you go back to the bookstore to exchange it, and there you meet a girl who is also exchanging her copy. And together you get pulled into this global conspiracy involving forged books, secret police, mistranslations, and censorship.
And you never actually get to finish the story you started reading.
Never. You just keep reading the first chapters of 10 different novels, all of which get interrupted. It's incredibly playful, but it's also profound. It breaks that suspension of disbelief that we're always taught is essential to fiction.
Another great example is John Fowles' The French Lieutenant's Woman.
Yes. It presents itself as a very rigorous, well-researched Victorian romance. It feels like a 19th century novel. But then, about halfway through, the narrator, who is clearly a 20th century voice, steps in. He stops the action.
He starts complaining about the characters.
He does.
Yeah.
He complains that his characters are being difficult and won't do what he wants them to do. He admits he is a puppet master. And then he offers the reader 3 different endings, a happy one, a tragic one, and an ambiguous one, and basically asks, which one do you prefer? Which reality would you like?
It's like the director walking onto the stage in the middle of the play and arguing with the actors.
And the purpose is to remind us that all narratives are choices, even the narratives of our own lives. We are choosing how to tell our story every day, and we could always choose differently.
Okay, another big tool is pastiche. And we need to distinguish this from parody, because they're close cousins, but they don't really act the same way.
They're very similar. Parody usually mocks the thing it imitates. It exaggerates the features to make them look ridiculous. Think of a parody of a horror movie.
Right, it's making fun of the tropes.
Pastiche is different. It's more like a collage. It's a neutral or even a celebratory imitation. It mimics the style of other genres or authors without the sneer. It's wearing a genre as a costume.
The writer John Barth called this the literature of exhaustion.
Yes. Barth put forth this idea, this argument, that by the mid-20th century, the novel as a form had used up all its possibilities. We'd done realism, we'd done romance, we'd done tragedy. In his words, everything has been done.
Which sounds incredibly depressing for a young writer.
Yeah.
A creative dead end.
It does. But his solution was pastiche. He said, okay, if we can't invent brand new forms, we'll just recombine the old ones in new ways. We will cannibalize the library. We will write novels that are mosaics of dead genres.
And a perfect example of this is Umberto Eco's The Name of the Rose.
Oh, it's a brilliant pastiche. On the surface, it's a medieval detective novel. The plot is basically Sherlock Holmes in a 14th century Italian monastery.
A monk is the detective.
Yes, William of Baskerville.
Yeah.
But Eco weaves that detective plot together with incredibly dense medieval theology, with semiotics, the study of signs, and with historical fiction. It's wearing the fun, accessible costume of a mystery novel to talk about very complex philosophy. It's reusing old forms to say something new.
This also leads directly to the collapse of the distinction between high and low culture. This is a huge part of the postmodern vibe. The modernists were often, well, let's be honest, they were a bit snobbish.
They certainly were. Modernism was often very elitist. High art was difficult, it was serious, and it was completely separate from the trash of mass culture. Joyce and Eliot were interested in comic books or advertising.
Postmodernism blows that distinction up. It loves trash.
It loves trash. It loves comic books, sci-fi, pornography, detective novels, advertising jingles. It throws them all into the blender with Shakespeare and Dante and sees what comes out.
Kurt Vonnegut is the king of this for me. Slaughterhouse-Five is a book about one of the most horrific events of the 20th century. The firebombing of Dresden in World War II.
An event Vonnegut himself survived. He was there. He was a prisoner of war. He saw the city completely destroyed. It is a deeply serious, deeply traumatic historical event.
And yet, how does he tell that story? He introduces aliens.
The Tralfamadorians, who look like little green toilet plungers and see in 4 dimensions. And the protagonist, Billy Pilgrim, becomes unstuck in time, jumping randomly back and forth between the war in Germany and a zoo on the alien planet where he's kept in a cage.
A modernist might say that's just disrespectful. You're taking a profound human tragedy and adding silly sci-fi tropes.
But Vonnegut's argument, and the postmodern argument, is that the high art tools of realism weren't enough. A linear, rational, realistic story couldn't possibly capture the sheer insanity of Dresden. The reality was so absurd, so fragmented, that only a low genre like science fiction could actually express what that trauma felt like.
He's saying that the world has become so crazy that realism is no longer realistic.
Exactly.
Speaking of absurdity and scale, we have to talk about maximalism, the systems novel.
This is the flip side of the cool, detached minimalism you also see in this period. Instead of less is more, the postmodern maximalist motto is often more is more. Or as the architect Robert Venturi famously said, less is a bore.
These are the doorstoppers, the books that could injure you if you drop them on your foot.
They are. Systems novel, as the critic Tom LeClaire called it, tries to encompass the massive, overwhelming complexity of the modern world. We are living in an information age where we're bombarded with data constantly. These novels try to mirror that feeling of being overwhelmed.
We're talking about Thomas Pynchon's Gravity's Rainbow, David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest, Don DeLillo's Underworld.
Gravity's Rainbow is the archetype here. It is encyclopedic. It's over 700 pages long, and it covers V2 rockets, Pavlovian conditioning, organic chemistry, global corporate conspiracies, paranoia, occultism. It's a labyrinth.
And it creates a feeling of information overload in the reader.
Intentionally. It's trying to map the system, the invisible networks of power, technology, and capital that control our lives, but that we can never quite see in their entirety.
And a key emotion in these books, in Pynchon especially, is paranoia. The characters feel like everything is connected, but they can't quite see the pattern.
Paranoia is the default setting of the postmodern protagonist. It makes sense, right? If you suspect that everything is a constructed narrative, you naturally start to suspect that someone is pulling the strings. In a world of information overload, seeing connections everywhere, even where they might not exist, is a way of trying to regain control. It's a survival mechanism.
So we have the techniques, but why did this happen? We've touched on the war, but there has to be a broader cultural context. The theorist Frederick Jameson famously called postmodernism the cultural logic of late capitalism. What does that mean?
Jameson is looking at the economic shift that happened after the war. We moved from an industrial age, an age of production, of factories, of making physical things, to a consumer age, an age of marketing, selling, images, and information.
Late capitalism is about the commodification of everything.
Everything, including our dissent. Even rebellion becomes a product to be sold.
Che Guevara starts as a revolutionary and ends up as a T-shirt sold at the mall.
That's a perfect example. Postmodernism reflects this world where the image of the thing is often more important, more powerful than the thing itself.
This brings us to Jean Baudrillard and his concept of hyperreality. This is one of those mind-bending concepts that feels more relevant today than when he first wrote about it.
It really, really is. Baudrillard argued that we have, in a way, lost touch with the real. We live in a world of simulacra, which are copies without an original.
Okay, can we get a concrete example of that? It sounds very abstract.
Baudrillard himself used the example of the First Gulf War. He wrote a very provocative series of essays called The Gulf War Did Not Take Place.
Which sounds insane. Of course it took place.
Right. But he wasn't saying people didn't die. He wasn't denying the physical reality of bombs falling. He was saying that for the rest of the world, for us watching at home, the war was a media event. It was a curated set of video clips, green-tinted night vision footage, and sound bites on CNN. We consumed the image of the war.
And that image, that simulation, was more real to us and had more of an impact on our lives than the dirty, bloody reality on the ground in Iraq.
That's the hyper-real. The map has replaced the territory.
And eventually, we forget the territory even exists. We start to prefer the map.
And literature reflects this. In Don DeLillo's fantastic novel White Noise, the characters are obsessed with brands, with television, with simulations. There's a famous scene where there's a huge chemical spill, an airborne toxic event, and the characters go to verify that it's real, not by looking out the window at the giant black cloud, but by turning on the TV and watching the simulation of the cloud.
The simulation on TV is more real to them than the thing itself.
That's hyperreality in a nutshell.
We should also briefly mention the precursors here.
Yeah.
We talked about modernism, but there are other bridges being built. The Beat generation, for instance.
Yes. William S. Burroughs is a key figure here. He pioneered the cut-up technique. He would literally take a page of text, cut it into pieces with scissors, and then rearrange the pieces randomly to create new sentences.
Why would he do that?
It was a way of breaking what he called the control system of language. Burroughs believed that language is a virus that controls our minds. And so cutting it up, introducing randomness, was a way to disrupt the programming. It's a very postmodern impulse. Rejecting the author's control, celebrating chance over intention.
And what about magic realism? Authors like Gabriel Garcia Marquez or Jorge Luis Borges, where do they fit in?
They're often grouped with postmodernism, and they certainly share some features, but they have their own distinct roots in Latin American culture and politics. They share that rejection of strict Western realism. But Borges is really the bridge.
The bridge between modernism and postmodernism.
I think so. His short stories from the 30s and 40s, like the one about the library that contains every possible book, or the story about a map that is the exact size of the empire it depicts, they anticipate almost every single theme we've discussed. He was questioning the nature of infinity and reality long before the term postmodern was even in vogue.
So we have this massive, complex, sometimes infuriating movement. It deconstructs truth, it plays with form, it embraces chaos. But not everyone was a fan. We have to talk about the critique. Because for some people, postmodernism wasn't just a literary style. It was a dangerous dead end.
It was. And the critiques come from very different directions. We have a powerful political critique, most famously from Noam Chomsky, and then a more existential or ethical critique from within literature itself, from the writer David Foster Wallace.
Let's start with Chomsky. He's a linguist and a famous leftist political activist. You would think he might like the postmodern questioning of power and authority.
Right.
But he hated it.
He really, really did. Chomsky's argument is essentially this. Exactly. If truth is just a power game between competing stories, then there are no moral facts. Chomsky argued that to fight for the oppressed, you need to be able to stand up and say, this is objectively happening, it is an objective fact, and it is objectively wrong. Postmodernism, by dissolving truth into a kind of murky relativity, disarms the activists.
He also had some very harsh words for the academic side of it, didn't he?
He was brutal. He viewed postmodern theory, the dense, jargon-filled writing of people like Derrida or Lacan, as fundamentally elitist. He argued that it created a new priesthood of intellectuals who were completely insulated from actual activism.
They were just talking to each other.
Yes, they were in the university writing unreadable papers about how everything is a text while real people were suffering in the real world. He saw it as a way for intellectuals to feel radical without ever actually having to do the hard, messy work of political change.
Ouch, that stings. But it leads us to the other major critique, which came from inside the literary world itself, from David Foster Wallace.
And this is so interesting because Wallace was, in many ways, a master of the postmodern form. Infinite Jest is a classic postmodern systems novel, but he also diagnosed a deep sickness in the movement.
And for him, the sickness was irony.
It was irony. He acknowledged that back in the 60s, postmodern irony was necessary. It was like a beaker of acid thrown in the face of the 1950s, that very stiff, hypocritical father knows best culture. Irony was crucial for exposing the lies. It cleared the ground.
But then, we just kept doing it. We never stopped.
Yes. Wallace said, irony has only emergency use. It's great for exploding a lie, but it's terrible for building a truth. Once you've burned everything down with irony, what do you replace it with? Nothing.
Because if you're ironic all the time, you never have to be sincere. You never have to risk being vulnerable or looking uncool.
Precisely. Wallace called it a cage, the voice of the trapped who have come to enjoy their cage. And he saw that postmodernism had been completely co-opted by the very culture it was trying to critique. Advertising became ironic. TV shows became self-reflexive. The revolution became a marketing strategy.
So Wallace argued for something new. Something he called a new sincerity.
He argued that the next generation of rebels wouldn't be the cool kids rolling their eyes and deconstructing everything. They would be the ones who were brave enough to be sincere, to feel valid emotion, to be sentimental, even at the risk of looking naive or foolish. He wanted to move from the endless postmodern game playing back to something that felt, well, human.
Which brings us to today. Postmodernism as a distinct literary movement, it probably peaked in the 70s and 80s. But looking around, did it end? Or did we just drown in it?
That is the provocative question to end on, isn't it? If postmodernism is defined by fragmentation, by information overload, by the loss of a shared, verifiable truth, and the blurring of reality and simulation, well, just look at the internet, look at fake news, look at social media algorithms that feed each of us our own personalized alternate reality.
We are living in the hyperreal. It's no longer a theory.
We are. The dystopian predictions of Pynchon and Baudrillard aren't avant-garde fiction anymore. They're our Tuesday morning newsfeed. In a very real way, we haven't moved past postmodernism. We've just moved into it so completely that we don't even notice the water we're swimming in anymore.
So to summarize this whole movement, it's really a shift from the search for meaning to an examination of how meaning is produced.
Yes, and a transition from the depth of modernism to the surface and play of postmodernism. And as Wallace and Chomsky warned, that can be a dangerous place to get stuck. I still believe that the modernist critique was necessary, but the postmodern refusal to believe in anything, universality, truth, connection, leaves us in a very difficult spot, philosophically.
Even if the philosophy is bleak, though, the literary toolkit it gave us, the metafiction, the non-linearity, the pastiche, it changed how we tell stories forever.
Oh, without a doubt. The techniques are now just part of the DNA of contemporary fiction.
So what's the final thought for our listeners? What do we take away from this?
I think it means we have to be critical readers, not just of books, but of the world. Postmodernism gave us the tools to question the narrative, to always ask who is telling this story and why, to look for the voices in the margins.
But the critiques warn us not to get lost in the funhouse of pure skepticism.
Exactly. You have to question the story, yes. But you also have to find a place to stand. You have to find a way to connect, to find meaning, even if it's provisional, even if it's just in the fragments.
So we have to build our mosaic, but maybe we can glue a few of the pieces together with some sincerity.
A sincere mosaic. I like that very much.
There you have it. Literary postmodernism. From broken vases to paranoia to the search for a new kind of feeling. It's a lot to digest, but that's why we do these deep dives.
Indeed.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the margins of literature. Keep questioning the narrative, keep reading between the lines, and we'll see you next time.